What if everything you've been told about government debt is wrong? What if the government doesn't need your taxes to spend money? What if deficits don't actually matter? And what if the only real limit is inflation? That's the core of modern monetary theory, a radical idea that's quietly shaping politics and economic debates. Some call it the solution to almost every problem. Others call it the most dangerous idea in economics. Today we're going to break it down clearly, what MMT actually claims, where it comes from, and why the Austrian School says it's fundamentally wrong. Let's look at what MMT actually claims. Let's start with the basics. Modern monetary theory, MMT for short, is a school of economic thought that says the government's relationship with money is fundamentally different from yours and mine. Here is the core idea, in plain English. You and I are currency users. We earn money, we spend money, we save money. If we run out, we're broke. If we spend more than we earn, we go into debt. If we can't pay our debts, we default. The rules are simple and they're real. The federal government, MMT says, is a currency issuer. It doesn't need to earn dollars before it can spend them. It creates dollars by spending them. And because it creates the currency, it can never run out. You can't default on a debt that's denominated in a currency you have the power to create. That's the foundation. Everything else in MMT builds from there. And I'll be honest, that first point is not crazy. It's technically accurate about how the monetary system works. The federal government does not operate like a household. It doesn't collect taxes first and then spend. The sequencing is more complicated than that. Where MMT goes wrong, and it goes very wrong, is in what it concludes from that starting point. Let's go through the 5 big claims. Claim 1. Sovereign governments can't go broke. Because they issue their own currency, governments that borrow in their own currency, the US, Japan, the UK, Australia, can always print more money to pay their bills. Default is a political choice, not a financial necessity. Claim 2. Taxes don't fund spending. This one throws people. MMT says the government doesn't need your tax dollars to pay for programs. It creates money by spending. Taxes serve a different purpose. They drain money from the economy to manage inflation and redistribute wealth. Claim 3. Deficits are not a problem. Government deficits, in MMT's framing, are actually accounting surpluses for the private sector. Every dollar the government spends in excess of what it collects is a dollar sitting in someone's bank account. The national debt is not a burden. It's the sum of all the dollars the government has spent into the economy, but not yet taxed back. Claim 4. Inflation is the only real limit. If the government can always create money, what stops it from just spending infinitely? MMT's answer: inflation. When the government spends too much relative to the economy's real productive capacity, prices rise. That's the natural break. Claim 5. The government as employer of last resort. MMT's signature policy proposal, the federal job guarantee. Any American who wants a job could get one from the government. The program automatically expands during recessions and contracts during booms, acting as an economic stabilizer. That's MMT in a nutshell. It sounds radical. In some ways it is. In other ways, it's just a description of how governments already operate, dressed up in academic language that makes limitless spending sound like science. MMT didn't appear out of nowhere. It has intellectual roots going back more than a century. The most important precursor is chartalism, the idea developed by German economist Georg Friedrich Knapp in his 1905 book, The State Theory of Money. Knapp argued that money derives its value not from gold or any commodity, but from the state's declaration that it must be accepted as payment. Money is what the government says money is. That's chartalism, And it's partially correct, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. The modern version of MMT was largely developed in the 1990s by Warren Mosler, a hedge fund manager, not an academic. In 1993, he published a paper called Soft Currency Economics. Mosler's background matters. He wasn't a professor theorizing about how the economy should work. He was a trader who had made money betting on Italian government bonds. Bonds that conventional wisdom said were risky because Italy was running large deficits. His insight: Italy couldn't default on debt denominated in its own currency. He was right. He made money. And he built a theory around that insight. From there, MMT spread through academia. The key names are L. Randall Wray, Bill Mitchell, Pavlina Cherneva, and Stephanie Kelton, who became MMT's most visible public face. Kelton served as chief economist on the U.S. Senate Budget Committee and as a senior economic advisor to Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns. Her 2020 book, The Deficit Myth, became a New York Times bestseller. That's the pipeline. From a hedge fund manager's trading insight in 1993 to a Senate Budget Committee economist in the 2010s to a best-selling book in 2020. MMT's political moment arrived in two waves. First, after the 2008 financial crisis, when mainstream economics looked broken and the idea that deficits were dangerous seemed absurd while governments spent trillions with no immediate collapse. Second, during COVID, when the government sent stimulus checks, the Fed bought trillions in assets, and the deficit exploded. Yet the catastrophe the deficit hawks predicted did not immediately arrive. To people sympathetic to large-scale government spending, this looked like proof that MMT was right. The Austrian School has a very different interpretation of those same events. Before the Austrian Critique, and this is important, let's be honest about what MMT gets right. The US government is not like a household. It doesn't need to collect taxes before it spends. It can run deficits for extended periods without immediately collapsing. Japan has run deficits for decades with debt over 250% of GDP and has not experienced the hyperinflation that conventional economics predicted. These are real observations about how fiat money systems work. MMT's descriptive analysis of government accounting mechanics is largely accurate. The problem is not the description. The problem is the prescription. The idea that because governments can spend freely, they should, and that the only risk is inflation that can be managed with taxes. That's where MMT falls off a cliff. The Austrian critique of MMT is not mainly about hyperinflation horror stories. It runs deeper. First, MMT misunderstands money. MMT treats money as a government creation, valuable because the state says so. The Austrian School says, wrong. Money was not invented by governments. It evolved spontaneously in the market. Traders discovered that certain goods, gold, silver, salt, were widely accepted. They became money through voluntary use, not by decree. When the state replaces market money with its own currency, it doesn't improve money. It turns it into a political tool. As Mises put it, government is the only institution that can take a valuable commodity like paper and make it worthless by printing more of it. Second, the knowledge problem. MMT says, spend until inflation appears, then tax the excess money back out. Sounds simple. It isn't. By the time government detects inflation, debates it, passes new taxes, and implements them, months or years have passed. The economy has already moved on. Hayek called this the pretence of knowledge, the false belief that a central authority can possess and process the information needed to steer a complex economy in real time. It can't. It never has. Third, political incentives. MMT assumes governments will responsibly hit the brakes when inflation rises. This is the most naive assumption in modern economics. Which politician campaigns on, "Vote for me, I'll raise your taxes to cool the economy"? The political incentive is always to spend more and delay the pain. MMT simply hands that impulse a theoretical permission slip. Baader would have put it more bluntly. Giving politicians the power to create money without limit is like giving an alcoholic the keys to the liquor store, and then being surprised when the bottles disappear. Fourth, the historical record. Every major hyperinflation of the last century, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, followed the same pattern. Government spent far beyond real productive capacity and financed the gap with newly created money until the currency collapsed. MMT supporters always reply, those cases were special. War reparations, oil shocks, external debt, colonial disruption. The Austrian response is simple. Every failed currency had a unique story. The pattern that never changes is the same. Unlimited spending plus money creation plus loss of credibility. Credibility is not a technical feature. It is a function of restraint, and restraint is exactly what MMT makes optional. You might think modern monetary theory is just a fringe academic idea. It's not. MMT is not official policy anywhere, but its core assumptions have quietly entered mainstream politics. The idea that deficits don't really matter, or at least matter far less than we were taught, now shapes how large parts of the political class think about spending. You can see it in the multi-trillion-dollar pandemic response, in massive spending bills, and in the casual raising of the debt ceiling to $41 trillion. Many politicians who would never call themselves MMT supporters still act as if America's reserve currency status gives the U.S. permanent permission to run large deficits with limited consequences. That permission may last longer than Austrian economists expect. But here's the Austrian warning. The length of the rope does not change what happens when you reach the end of it. Japan is the favorite MMT example. Decades of huge deficits, no hyperinflation. MMT says, proof the theory works. The Austrian School says, proof that the consequences can be postponed. Look at Japan's long stagnation, its zero interest rate trap, and its aging society with almost no growth. Is that success or a slow motion warning? A country can pile up debt for a long time without collapsing. But every year of deficit spending financed by money creation and artificially low rates makes the eventual correction harder and more painful. Mises called this the point of no return, the moment when the distortions become too large to unwind without severe damage. We may not be there yet, but every year of MMT-style thinking moves us closer. So, where does this leave us? MMT is not completely wrong. Its description of how government finance actually works is more accurate than the household budget metaphor politicians love to use. The government is not a household. Sovereign currency issuers do have more flexibility than conventional economics admits. Japan shows that large deficits can be sustained longer than most people expected. But the Austrian School's core objection still stands. More flexibility is not unlimited flexibility. The ability to postpone consequences is not the same as eliminating them. And the political incentives of democracy make the responsible use of that power. The disciplined application of MMT's inflation brake, not just difficult, but structurally unlikely. The real problem with MMT is not that it endorses inflation. It is that it assumes policymakers have both the knowledge and the political will to manage a pure fiat system wisely. That assumption has never held in any government that has ever existed. As the Mises Institute has noted, MMT is not modern. Chartalism has existed since 1905. Governments have been printing money to fund spending for as long as governments have existed. MMT is less a monetary theory than a fiscal theory with convenient monetary assumptions, an observation about what governments can do, combined with a hope unsupported by history, that they will stop before the damage becomes irreversible. Baader would have summed it up in one line. Giving a government unlimited access to the printing press and trusting it not to abuse it is like giving a child unlimited candy and trusting them to stop at one. The child always eats the candy. What do you think? Is MMT a useful insight or a dangerous permission slip? Drop your take in the comments. I'll be reading them. And if this kind of clear analysis is what you're after, hit subscribe. More is already in the works.